of his holy and divine word. And as always is indeed our prayer that hopefully something is said this morning that you'll find to be beneficial and thereby be able to apply to your life and be a better Christian and a better person in the future. Certainly we want to continue to remember all those that are sick and shut in, and we want to continue to remember in our prayers those that may be undergoing various operations and procedures. We hear various ones, and they're listed in the bulletin, and so we want to certainly remember them in our prayers. And then we want to take this opportunity this morning to wish all of our mothers a happy Mother's Day. Those that are here and those that are listening in, we want you to know how much we appreciate all our mothers. And you know, mothers are special. I believe mothers are special because they give life. Not only do they give life, but they give of themselves. And I think that makes them closer to Jesus than anyone because how special they are. And I would say to you this morning, if you have a mother, if your mother is still alive, you are fortunate and you are blessed. And you need to take this opportunity to thank them for being your mother. And they are wonderful. Now, there are also mothers that maybe not have any offsprings, but because of their lifestyle, they serve as mothers. And I have to say we've been fortunate to have many of those here at Russell Road who may not necessarily have their kids here or may not even have kids, but they serve as a model to all of us. And we want you to know how much we appreciate them. Now, let's get on to our lesson. As you know, we were studying the Go statement. Our lesson, this series is on the Go statement. And today's lesson is entitled, Go Where I Go. All right? Go Where I Go. In lesson 2, and we find that the author uses a backdrop for his for the scriptures, and we're not going to go through all these scriptures, but he uses Matthew, the 4th chapter, verses 18 through 22, Luke 5, 1 through 11, and John 1 through verses 35 through verses 51. And so those what he uses on the backdrop. Hopefully you had a chance to study those. If you hadn't, we're going to ask that you take the time this week to do that. Also, I'm going to ask one other favor of you. I've asked Brother Graham to take the microphone around to those who may have a comment or question during the class. So if you have a question, I'm going to ask that you raise your hand, and then I'm going to ask Brother Graham to go around and bring the mic for you. That way, when folks are watching this either live, on YouTube, whether it's live or later on, they will hear what's going on in the class, and there won't be so many dead spots in the class. So bear with us. And so if you have a question or comment, raise your hand, and then I'll direct Brother Graham to you. He has graciously agreed to do that for us. Now, let's get on into the lesson. So it says, and he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. In Matthew, the 4th chapter, that's verses 19 and verses 22. So who's doing the talking there, and who's he talking to? Jesus is doing the talking, right? And these are men that he is choosing or will choose to do what? Be his disciples. All right. Let's get on into this. Jesus chose men of faith. He chose faithful men, all right? And so he didn't necessarily go out and choose men that had done everything right or men who had all the best of character. In fact, when we look at the disciples, we find they had a number of things lacking. We find that they were not necessarily some of the people with some of the best character. We find that some of them was hungry for power. Some of them was used pretty rough language. Some of them had a lot of bad character. Gary, if he would, Gary has his hand up. And so we find that these were not necessarily, in a lot of ways, the men that we would have chosen.
And they were unlearned men.
Okay, so they were unlearned men. And so many of them was not necessarily what? Educated, right? And so now, and let me say this since we brought that up. Some of them was educated. And so there's nothing wrong with a good education. But the education ain't necessarily required, right? Now let me share this with you also. So oftentimes, I don't want to get hit myself. Let me go ahead and show you this. These men was picked by Jesus. I don't know if that excites you or not, but I had to ask this question of myself, and I'm asking you, what is it like to be picked by Jesus? I mean, you're not being picked by just anyone, but you're being picked by the master. And you know, and as I was looking at this, in my previous occupation, I had an opportunity many times to hire people for jobs. And during that, I have a chance to conduct interviews. And oftentimes when people come in for an interview, they would be very, very what? Some would be nervous, but most of the time they would be what? They would dress well. What else they would do? Well spoken, right? In fact, I don't know of a time that I've interviewed somebody that I really didn't want to hire. I wanted to hire almost everybody that I interviewed, but unfortunately I only had one position. And so I couldn't hire everybody. But there's a couple of things else I found out about that process. Sometimes there were some people that would come in and they would blow my socks off, if you will. I'd be so excited and thought, this is the person for the job. Only to find out they did a real good interview. But I didn't do a complete and thorough interview, because if I'd have did more research, I would have known that that wasn't the person for the job. And then I'll tell you something else. Everybody that comes and applies for a job, they may be looking for a job, but they ain't necessarily looking to work. So everybody that wants a job don't want to work, right? But oftentimes when you have applied, and I've been in a situation myself, when you have applied for a job and you're waiting, you have to go and you have to sit by the phone and you're waiting on what? A call. And sometimes, depending on what happens, sometimes if some people call you and you're expecting a call any minute or that day, and they get you on the phone, they want to talk to you, say, I'm going to have to get off the phone because I'm waiting on a call, right? Because that call is important to you. Here's what I want to share with you as well. I want to show you what Jesus' prayer was. In John the 17th chapter, verses 15 through verses 18, he says, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by thy truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. So this is what Jesus prayed. He prayed that God would not take us out, but that he would do what? Protect us. Now, don't you know, that's something that God is praying, or Jesus prayed for our protection. And he prayed, not only did he pray for our protection, but he prayed to the ultimate protector. You can't get better protection from anyone. Now, who do we need protection from? The evil one. And we know that the evil one is after us. The evil one is always after us, right? But God wanted us, or Jesus wanted us to be, specifically these disciples, he was praying for. He was praying specifically for them and telling God, he says, you have given them to me, and I hadn't lost them. And so we ought to be thankful when we find that we're being prayed for and sought after by Jesus. Now real quickly, I'm going to move back. I'm going to get on with the lesson, but I just want to say this because something I forgot about. You know, when it comes to being picked, and I've heard Brother Dansby talk about this, and that's why I thought about it, because he just walked in. You know, oftentimes when we are young kids and we are playing on different sports teams, we're raising our hands and we're saying what? Pick me, right? And oftentimes we want somebody, we want to be picked. Nobody wants to be the last to be picked. Right? Nobody wants to be last. You want to, why? Because you want to think you're bringing some value to the team. And so here's, and the reason I wanted to point that out is because we ought to be excited about being picked by Jesus. We ought to be just thrilled to death to know that he has picked us, and we ought to be wanting to bring something to the team, some sort of value to the team. Otherwise, why did he pick us? So how Jesus calls people? How does Jesus call people? If you study the lesson, you will find that the author says that he calls them by his grace. He calls them by his grace. Now what is grace? We've studied that many times. So what is grace? It's unmerited favor. So he calls us even though we're what? We're not worthy or we're undeserving. Right? I mean, sometimes we've been offered jobs that we weren't deserving of. And when you're offered a job, see, here's the difference in what we do. I like to show you things in secular life in terms of our Christian life. In a job, when you are called and you realize and recognize that you're undeserving of the job, then you do what? You work hard. You do everything you can within your power to live up to that position. Right? Because you don't want anybody to say he didn't deserve that position. And so you work very hard to live up to it. You rise your level, right? Well, why is it then when we come to our spirituality that when we're called or we're picked, and we just said we're undeserving, and yet we what? We do very little to disprove the evil one, because the evil one is saying he's going to God and he's telling God, you didn't that, you shouldn't have picked him. I'm telling you, he ain't no good. And then we do what? We prove him right. Why? Because we don't do anything. In spite of all the things that God has done for us. Oh, I can work with that. I'm going to leave that alone because I don't want to get too much trouble. Apostle Paul shows us this by he's saying in Galatians 1:6. Somebody read it if you will.
I am amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel.
And so Apostle Paul found them doing what? They started looking and going elsewhere. They started taking on other characteristics and other traits other than what they was taught and given by them who had received it from Jesus Christ. And he says, I'm surprised. I'm amazed. I'm amazed. If you go to King James, he says, I'm surprised. In fact, one verse, he says, I'm afraid of you. Right? Why? Because you're taking on some characteristics that I'm not familiar with, and you didn't learn them of us. There's nothing more disappointing to a parent than when they see their child take an act or do an act that they know didn't come from their house. They say, I didn't teach you that. I didn't train you that. That's not, I don't know where you got that from. Right? And so oftentimes, in fact, I'm going to say this, I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but it's because we're thanking mothers for Mother's Day. But that could not be anything more disheartening to a mother than when they see their child go out and commit some kind of heinous crime. Nobody is hurt more than the mother. Now I had to tell you, the father say, he'll quickly turn and look to the mother and say, that's your child. Even though he fathered him, he would say, that's your child. Right? But the mother would never what? Never give up. She will always see something good, regardless of what you, and you know, that's what, and the reason I bring that out is because regardless of what we may have done in our lives, Jesus always sees something redeemable in us. He always wants to bring us back. Right? I'm going to move on. And then I love when Paul says in the 15th verse, he says, but when God, who set me apart, even from my mother's womb, and through his grace called me, I was pleased. In other words, in fact, you go a little further, Paul said, I didn't consort with any flesh and blood. I didn't have a conversation with anybody else. When he said, look at who he's given the credit to. He's giving the credit to Jesus, right? He said, when he called me, and then he wants you to know how important or what level he put God at. He said that it was God who separated me. He set me apart, and he separated me from what? So he gives God the praise for him being born. You know, and again, I can't help, because it's Mother's Day, to say just how much of a powerful impact that is, that our mothers are willing to go through what they go through to give us life. Huh? To go through what they go through just to give us life. In fact, it should be impressed upon us, and I'm trying to stay away from some of these things, but I have to say this here, especially in this day, in this environment, this period of time, when there are so many mothers that are unwilling to give their children life. Even to the fact that some are willing to wait until the child is even born and then do away with them. But your mother was so mindful and was so thankful of God for you that she went through and endured all that. And I have to say this, many of them had to go 9 months. Now, I don't know about you, but I would not want to carry anything around for no 9 months. Some of us won't tote our Bible for 1 week. Huh? And so we have to look at that. And so I'm saying all those things because I want you to understand just how appreciative and how thankful I am, even though she is no longer with us, for the mother in which I had. Because I know the value of a real mother. And then he goes on to say, after you have suffered for a while, the God of all grace, who called you, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. 1 Peter 5:10. So we just witnessed, and I had the good fortune of one of the young men that worked with me. His son was drafted in the NFL. And so he was picked, right? Because he was drafted. Now all he did is he went and he was called up, but he hadn't made the team yet. And so he has to go through all the things, and they have to prepare him now to be a NFL football player, right? And so he has some things, so there's some things he got to learn. Well, that's the way it is with us. When we obey the gospel of Christ, there are some things that we need to learn to become a Christian. Now, we are a Christian, but we're not a full Christian. We're not fully developed. And so there's some things we have to learn. And what I like about it is, look who's doing the training here. Look who's doing the development here. You see, we are being brought. See, if you're in the football, you got to go to the NFL. They got all these coaches and trainers and all these folks that's going to be helping you. And so but look who we have. Peter says here that God himself, the God of all grace, he's going to take a personal interest in each and every one of us to develop us to be the type of Christian we need to be. Ain't that something? He's going to, it's his thing. He's going to perfect you. He's going to confirm you. He's going to get you strength, and he's going to establish you. So we got to do it now. So now how Jesus calls people, he's called them by his grace. We've already established that, right? And so not called because we are what? Profitable servants. We don't have anything that we can offer God. I mean, we need to, I realize we need to stop for a minute and think about the real value we bring. We don't have anything. There's nothing we could do to warrant God's grace. and needed to warrant his salvation. That's nothing. Right? In fact, he shows us it, and I would challenge you to, in your leisure time, to go back and read some history. Not that fictional stuff, but get some real history. And I want you to see and look at the relationship, because we lose this, the relationship between a king and their servants. Because we don't really understand it. In fact, I'm reading a book right now, and I'll just tell you this part. It talks about that, and do you realize that when you walk in the presence of a king, that if you was not a nobleman, you couldn't even look upon the king. You had to bow down. It was not permitted for you to even gaze upon it. And if you did, guess what they did? Took you out. Because you would have been considered to have disrespected the king. And so the reason I'm bringing that out is we need to think about our relationship with Jesus Christ. He is our king. What respect and honor do we provide to him? And how do we let others respect and provide for him? Oh, y'all getting quiet now. But I knew, but to appreciate this and appreciate the relationship and to appreciate what the Bible is talking to us about, you need to do some research or some history or some study in some history on the relationship of masters and their servants. Now the author goes on to share with it. He says in Luke 17:10, so you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, we are unworthy servants and we have only done our duty. In other words, the author was using here, or what they shared here, was that a servant had went out in the field and he had worked all day. I mean, from morning to night. And when he came back in, after having worked all day, he had to come in and prepare a table for his master, fix the food, and put it before him, before he could do anything for himself. And the question was asked, whom of you would ask your servant to come in and have a seat? You wouldn't. He said you wouldn't do that. You would say, fix my plate. Now, you don't believe that's true? Many of us have mothers who have went out and worked all day. Okay, let me start again. Many of us have mothers who have went out and worked all day. And then when they come in, we sit down and say, Mama, I'm ready to. And Mama has to, we don't even get up and go fix our own plate. Mama has to. So that's why he's saying to you, he says, you, even though you are unworthy, right? And even though your mother has shown you this grace, right? Look at how you treat her. And so when we have done all we can do in the call of Christ, we ain't done nothing but our own duty. You ain't done nothing special. You know, we like, and I don't know when y'all have this mama thing, but I had to tell y'all this. You know, my mother, she treated me special. I was special to my mother. And I would say to you, all of her children were special. But I was special. And I like her treating me special. I have some problems right now because she treated me special. Many of you know I don't eat certain things because my mama treated me special. She would cook a meal, and I said, I don't like that she cooked something special for me. That's what she would do, right? So I don't eat stuff that I don't like. Right? I know what some of y'all say, you sit there. I know some of you grew up in a house where you either eat or to go with it. My mama didn't do that to me, right? And so what I'm saying to you is we all like to be treated special. And God has treated us special. But I want you to understand something. We are not special. You might be treated special, but you are not special. In fact, we are unworthy of this grace. We are unworthy of this blessing. And even so, God is treating us special. Ain't that something? He's treating us special. I want to share this with you too. So there was another parable Jesus gave. He gave the parable of the marriage feast. And we find that he says, many are called, but few are chosen. See, I never just understand that. We all got a calling. But we all ain't going to make it in. That's really what it's saying. And in fact, in this parable, it's in Matthew, the 22nd chapter. And I'm just going to read, get somebody here if you will. And this is the Amplified verse. Read verses 12 through verses 14 right quick, if you can see that.
And he said, friend, how did you come in here without wearing the wedding clothes that were provided you? And the man was speechless and without excuse. Then the king said to the attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him into the darkness outside. In that place there will be weeping over sorrow and pain and grinding of teeth over distress and anger. For many are called, invited, or summoned, but few are chosen.
Amen. And so Jesus was giving us a parable in regards to a king whose son was getting married. And you can go read that whole parable. I won't read all of it for you, but I want you to see this. And so they had to end up, as we get on to the story, they had to end up going out and inviting others. And Jesus had prepared, or the king had, because it was a feast and it was the king's feast in his honor, the king had provided for clothing for them to wear at this wedding. But this one guy, out of all the people, he decided, I ain't wearing it. And basically what he did was he disrespected the king. And so the king said, what did he say? How is it that you're not wearing the wedding clothing? How is it? And so the reason I bring that out is that I think Jesus was trying to get us to understand was when we stand before God and we're not found in the proper clothing. And the clothing is what? Living the life of a Christian. That's what the clothing is. He's going to say, how is it that you're found without? And guess what this man here said? He couldn't say nothing. He didn't have any excuse. And neither will we. That's the whole thing of it. We won't have an excuse. There won't be an excuse for us not having done the things that are our duty. We won't have an excuse. We will be speechless. You got a lot to say now. Oh, yeah, you can say a lot. You know, we got folks, you know, in fact, we specialize in having the last word. You know, we like to say something, somebody say something about it, and then they say, what you say? And we turn our head and we mumble it, we walk. We want to have the last word. But you won't have no last words there. Only words you have is this weeping that's going on. The disciples are willing to follow. They left everything. So we go back to Luke and we find that Jesus, if you remember when he went and he got with them and they had toiled all night in the boat, right? And they caught nothing. And in fact, they was putting up their nets. And he told them, after he had talked to people, he told them to push your ships out a little, or push your boat out a little bit farther. And they said, we're going to do it because you said it. But I want you to understand, we masters at this, and we've been doing this all night. And when they went out a little further and they lowered their nets, the Bible said that what? The nets was so full that it was about to break. And they had to go and do what? They had to call some help, right? And so, first, before we go too far in this, I want you to see that sometimes Jesus is asking us just to go out a bit farther. I know we have toiled all night. I know you have done all you think that is possible to do. But Jesus said, I need you to go a little bit farther. Sometimes if we just go a little bit farther with somebody, we can have a big impact or a huge impact on their life only if we just would have went a little bit farther. If we had went just a little bit farther, maybe we would have changed some of these things or prevented some of these things that we see happening if somebody would have just went just a little bit farther. And this is what Jesus was having them do. And now after they did that and they saw and they recognized or realized who it was, it says they dropped everything and they followed him. In fact, Luke, the 5th chapter, verses 11, it says, so they pulled their boats up on the shore. They left everything and followed him. So what is our first response when we meet Jesus? To leave everything. When you see Jesus, in other words, we should recognize, and somewhere in the Bible tells us, and it uses this as it was a great pearl, right? And so when you see a great pearl, you'll go and sell everything you have for this great pearl. With salvation is this great pearl. And so when we see Jesus, or we meet Jesus, we should be willing to leave everything. And then it was said, and then to follow him. They didn't have to be told. See, we're being, some things you shouldn't have to be told to do. See, they wasn't being told. When they realized what they had or who they was in the presence of, they knew what to do. And maybe if we stop there for just a minute or two, maybe that's some of our problem. Maybe people are looking at us, and they look at us, and we're professing to be one thing, but yet we're another. And so people recognize us as not being the real thing. And people don't want to follow something phony. Oh, y'all ain't with me, right? You see, they knew when they saw what he had done. He had already preached to the people. But when he had done what he had taken them out and gave them instruction, and they filled their nets like they had never done before, they knew he was the Messiah. So they knew what to do. We don't need to be doing this. In other words, what are you saying there? For them to drop everything, it must have said that they knew he was going to be able to feed them. Right. He was going to be able to clothe them. Amen. He was going to be able to take care of their every need. Amen. Brother Graham, Brother Gordon.
You know, it's something, if you watch, whether you watch the news, whether you're out and about, it's something how something will happen and folks will flock to where they think something is going on. And they'll drop everything. They don't know if it's danger. They don't know if it's dangerous. They don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing. They'll just go because they see everybody else going. We'll just go. We'll drop, we'll whatever we're doing. But then when it comes to the church, you know, what time, how long, you know, what am I going to have to give up? You know, all these questions come up. And we know who we're following. Right. These folks have no idea what they're going into, have no idea what they're about to step into. And folks will just go. We know who we actually are following and what he will do, but we're still questioning. Like I have no idea. How long is this going to take, Brother Gordon? You know, what am I going to have to give up? You know, and can we do it on another day? Do I have to do it today? I mean, that's what we do. And sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes because if there are other things that are important in our lives, there's no hesitation.
That's right.
But for some reason, there's some, you know, intrepidation in everything we do for the Lord. I'm talking in a general sense.
That's right. That's right. And I like what you said because I want to share a couple things with you even before I move on. Listening to what you said is that this is my view, that oftentimes people get excited about other folks' excitement. Right. So sometimes you can see people they'll jump up and down and they're hollering about something and you just get caught up in it. You don't know why they're jumping up and down, but they're excited, gets you excited. Right. Huh? Right. Now, last night I went to a concert or a symphony with Mary. And I can tell you I didn't like the music. I didn't like the music he was playing. I mean, it wasn't nothing wrong with it. I just didn't like it. But there was this one guy was sitting there, and we was at this Strand's Theater. He was sitting there, and for 2 hours, I mean, he was in it. He was there. He was one of them. He wasn't the only one, but he was one. I mean, but he was emphatic. It was like nobody else was at this but him and them. He didn't care who saw him. He didn't care who looked at. And I know this guy. I was telling me, I know this guy, and this guy is a dignitary. He would be somebody that you saw him and you saw him and you would say, oh, that's Mr. So-and-so. But he was into it. That was his thing. He would. But what I'm saying to you is that how is anybody going to follow us when there's no life in us? What are they following? I'm gonna get a little bit ahead of myself. But you said that and brought that up because, well, let me say this. I'm gonna go ahead and say it. I might be jumping too far ahead of myself, but let me go ahead and say this. You see, to follow somebody, you have to have confidence that these people got somewhere to go. Amen. And they know where they're going. Amen. These folks recognized immediately who this was, and they knew where he was going, and they wanted to be where he was going. Right. Oftentimes, we don't know where we're going. We don't know how we're going to get there. And so we do what? Like the kids say, we fake it. And so we walk around like we going somewhere and ain't going nowhere. Huh? So we need to get honest with ourselves and start doing some research and start doing some studying and get connected to Jesus. Because the thing, and again, you're going to find out a little bit later on this lesson if I don't run out of time, that these folks, that when you meet Jesus and you get to know Jesus, there's a change that happens. There's a change. But anyway, let's get on into the lesson because I want to certainly get here. So these disciples were willing to follow him. They left everything. They were willing to follow Jesus, but guess what? I think Vince talked about this a week or so ago. Excuses weren't acceptable. And we find in Luke, and I didn't put it all here, you can go read yourself, but in Luke, the 9th chapter, verses 57 through verses 62, you find that there was some folks who had a desire, at least they said they had a desire, to follow him. They said, but we need to go bury our father. Jesus said what? Let the dead bury the dead. And so you would have thought from that, as it already, Britain already did a great job, and I don't need to do of it, that Jesus was not telling them not to bury their father. But he understood something that we don't oftentimes understand. People love, and they are full of excuses. And every time we say do something, or God tells us or instructs us to do something, we got an excuse for not doing it. We're very good at excuses. And in fact, I would tell you, and I know I said this to you before, I had to say it because I'm trying to think about it, it's important how some things stick with you and they become indelible in your mind. But when I played baseball in high school, I had a coach. Now, I was one of the best practice baseball players you ever seen. In practice. I played infield, and I wouldn't let nothing go through the infield in practice. But only thing that I was better at than that, whenever I didn't catch a ball, I always had a good excuse. I was ready for it. I had one quick. You didn't take no time. It just came natural to me to give an excuse as to why I didn't do what needed to be done. And if we're honest with ourselves, we're like that too. Especially when it comes to our Christianity. We always have a, for not doing whatever it is, we know that somebody did something to me, and I wanted to do something back to them, and I knew I shouldn't do anything back to them, but I had an excuse for me being able to exact revenge. Right? I know the Bible. I know Jesus said forgive them. Right? Forgive those that what? I know what he said, but I got an excuse for not doing it. Hold on, Brother Patterson.
I'm sorry. And I just want to say that a lot of times it's hard, it's more difficult to forgive if it's a close family member to you. It's very difficult. And I have found myself questioning and say, am I really a Christian? does God mean that you're supposed to forgive this too? Because sometimes I think you can think that the person who's offended you has an obligation to tell you to ask your forgiveness, but really they don't. And last thing I'll say is I remember something that Brother Frank C. Brown used to say. He said, I thank God. He said that I have to give an account of how I treat you and not how you treat me.
Amen. So only one I would say, I would tell you that I think I give one better than that. Because if you really want to fall out with somebody, fall out with a Christian. Christians have a difficult time forgiving Christians. Now, I don't, I don't understand that. But I've seen two, I'll just give you an example of one I said. I seen two Christians one time, and Brother Graham knows what I'm talking about. I seen two Christians one time who basically almost slept in one another. These are two men, two brothers in Christ, who slept almost virtually in each other's arms. They were so close. Only for a few years later to see these two men, if one walk into a building to see the other man, he'll turn around and walk out. Because they didn't even want to speak to one another. They didn't want to even be in the presence of the room. I'm just telling you how Christians act with Christians, right? And so we had to ask ourselves, right? What examples are we giving, and what changes are we making in our lives, right? But let me move on, come around time here on this lesson. They were willing to follow Jesus. So they left everything, and they were willing to follow him. We see Jesus promised to change them. But as they spent time with Jesus and saw God in human form, they were changed into men who could serve God and remain faithful to him. We find an example of that in Acts, the 4th chapter, verses 13. And that's kind of back to what Gary was talking about earlier when he said these were unlearned men. Yet, because of their actions and because of their behaviors, these people concluded that they must have been with Jesus. Only thing could change them, where they would look like they look and act the way they act, they must have been around Jesus. Now, I don't know of a better indictment of a Christian than that, or one that challenges us more than that. Because if somebody see you and spend any length of time around you, they ought to be able to conclude in some form or in some matter that you've been around Jesus. Right? They ought to be able to conclude that. And I'm going to ask you, if you don't ever say nothing, if you don't ever do nothing, how are they going to know that? I'm asking. I don't know. I mean, y'all might learn me. Y'all remember now, this class is for me too. So y'all might help me learn something here, right? And I'm asking this question, and so I'm asking. I want to know how am I to know that you've been with Jesus when you say nothing and you do nothing, and then when you hear about him. Now, I'm going to stop. I'm going to bag up just a little bit. I got to bag up a little bit. I want y'all to understand. Let me just give y'all an example of what I'm saying. So the first time I got to go and watch a professional golf tournament, because I just had to go see Tiger Woods. So I went to the tournament. And when I first got there, quickly I learned you have to get 2 or 3 holes ahead of him if you really want to get a up-close and personal look at him. And so now when I went, I'm standing there, and he wasn't leading the tournament. I want you to remember that part too. He wasn't ahead. He wasn't a leader. In fact, he wasn't having a very good day. And I'm sitting there. I'm looking at the number one golfer in the world. He walked right there. I mean, he walked just like almost like Stewart. Of course, I got a rope. I can't do anything. But he's right. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing all the top players. They're walking by me, and it's like just a handful, if any, people are walking with them. Have you ever seen National Geographic where you see the movement or the travel of the wildebeest? When you see literally thousands upon thousands of these beasts? All of a sudden you look down and here come this roar and this mass of people. And somebody say, here come Tiger. So what do you say? These people who, and many of them, they, by the way they dress and the way they act, they knew nothing of golf. All they knew was Tiger Woods. And they wanted to be in the presence of Tiger. And guess who they all were cheering for? Y'all not, let me give you one more. Y'all ain't getting me. Y'all not getting this. I'm going to tell you one other thing. So I knew, my buddy and I knew that Tiger always went and practiced after the round. And so, and many people, many people knew this. And so we went to the driving range, and lo and behold, at the driving range, there's these bleachers. And the bleachers had a few people. We got in the bleachers. We had a good seat. And there was 2 openings for professional golfers right in front of the bleachers. Now, I don't know if Tiger did this on purpose, but it just looked funny to me. But they were all the best. V.J. Singh, Phil Mickelson. They hitting the golf ball, and they all hit it good. They hitting it right there. We see them right there. And there's 2 openings. And so pretty soon, the bleachers began to fill up. So we knew, here come Tiger. When Tiger came in the ropes to hit the balls, he didn't stop at those. He went down to the very end. You know what all the people in the bleachers did? Including yours truly. We got up and went down there where Tiger was. That's what we do for a man that's hitting a golf ball that don't even know me. Ain't never done nothing for me. Not that he wouldn't do, but he ain't never done nothing for me. But I'm talking about my Savior. I want to know who's going to get up this morning. When Jesus walks in the building, who's going to move over? Say, I want to be close to Jesus. I had to move. I couldn't just sit there because Jesus came in the building. I couldn't be just a part of it. I had to get Jesus' attention. I needed somebody to recognize me because I wanted him to know I was around Jesus. And you know what? I told y'all that story because I like telling that story. You know why I like telling that story? I want people to know that I was there with Tiger Woods. I want people to know I saw Tiger. I saw him up close and personal. But I'm here this morning to tell you I seen Jesus. I didn't see him physically, right? I didn't see him just like I see Brother Snow sitting there, but I've seen Jesus. How you seen it, Brother? I've seen him in the things that goes on in my life. I've seen it. I know what he can do. And I tell you what, he can hit a golf ball better than Tiger. But let me move on here. Every believer must ask himself, am I ignoring the call of God in my life? And if so, why? Every believer must ask themselves, am I ignoring? You know, and that's something, there's some calls that we won't take. And it's evident. You used to be, you didn't know we had phones that would ring, and you didn't know who was on the phone, so you had to pick it up to see who it was. Right? There was sometimes people would come to, in fact, I'm going to tell you something else I probably shouldn't tell you because some of you know about this, and it's took me because kids used to tell the man would come to the door for his rent money, and then they say, go tell him that I'm not here, and they go and say, my mama told me to tell you she ain't here. And so there are calls that we ignore. But back then you would answer the phone because you didn't know who was calling, right? But now we got caller ID. And so we can look at the calls, and there's calls that we do what? Yeah, especially if somebody calls us too often, right? And we go have us talk to ourselves about what they want now, right? And then some people we say they don't never call when they got good news. They only call when they got bad news, right? Jesus don't ever call us with bad news. He don't ever call us with bad news. And if there was a call that we should take, and while I'm on, I need to tell you this. You know, and I had to learn this lesson because I didn't know, again, back in my profession, I didn't know any better, but that, you know, especially when with my boss, I can be sitting there talking to you, we can have, and no matter who you were and what was going on, when my boss would call, I said, hold on a minute. I got to take the call. Now, he might call and it don't be nothing. And I'm talking to you about something that was really important. And most times than not, if you were talking to me, especially if you were one of my subordinates, what you were talking to me about was very important to you. But I would dismiss all that because my boss is called. I had to learn to stop doing that. It was difficult. Or I have a call, you know, one of the things that I'm telling y'all this so y'all know some things. You know, when you're talking to somebody on the phone, right, and you're talking to them and you get another call, you ain't supposed to drop it. Let me call you back. I got another call coming in. Well, what are you saying? My call ain't important? The only time we should drop calls is when Jesus is called. When Jesus is called, there is no call that we have. There's no conversation we have that's more important than Jesus. And in fact, I will share this before I sit down too. Make sure I say this. There's one call we won't be able to ignore. Everybody gets that call at some time or another. No matter what you're doing, no matter who you are, you get that call. And they don't say it don't ring 2 or 3 times. You can't put them on hold. You can't say, let me catch you later. That call was coming, right? So y'all know what call it is, right? But what I want to impress upon you, when Jesus calls, we ought to be listening. In fact, we ought to be wanting. In fact, look at what the author shared with you. He said, then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wish to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Amen. In Matthew 16, chapter and verse 24. So if he's saying if you want to come after him, you're going to do what? You're going to deny yourself. If you wish to be complete, go and sell your possessions, give it to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven, and come and follow me. Matthew 19:21. That's what he told the young man, right? If you want to be complete, that's what you got to do, right? Well, we got quiet there one day. Because we got a lot of excuses, right? But let me help y'all a little bit with that. You see, when you were introduced to the truth and you were brought to the cross, then at that point in time, you had to deny everything that you have ever learned, everything that you ever known, and you had to obey the gospel of Christ. You had to walk away from everything. And that's what you had to do. That's why we sing the song, all to Jesus I surrender, and all to him I freely give. And if you're not able to do that, he said you can't follow him. That's why the Bible tells us there's many who say they believe, right? But they weren't willing to do that. And so they turned away. And this is what I want to finish with. Notice what Jesus said. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. You see, in order to be a follower of Jesus, you have to first and foremost know his voice. Amen. Then secondly, you have to be willing to listen to him. And then if you listen to him, you'll be willing to follow. Amen. Many of us, we don't follow because we don't listen. We got too many things going on. We got too much going on in our lives. We got too much things, we got too much, just a lot of stuff. That's why Jesus tells us, I know you're going to have a lot of stuff, but guess what he says? Bring all that stuff and put it on me, and then follow me. So you got to take all that stuff off in order to follow him. We got a lot of ways, brothers. If we honest with ourselves, I'm going to say, I know y'all ready for me to say that. I'm finna sound. But if we honest with ourselves, we got a lot of things that hinders us from following Jesus. Some of you this morning, if you weren't so weighed down all the cares of this world, you would flap off that bench when you hear the word Jesus. But you can't do it. That mess got you weighted down. So many of us got so many problems that when the word Jesus is said, it just fly right on by us. We don't even hear it because we got so much going on in our mind. We worried about so much. We can't do it. And then there's those of us who are sitting there having to hold ourselves down. You ever seen a balloon filled with helium? Huh? You got to hold it down. And I must say this, and I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make some of you mad. I just want to come in the Russell one day, and I just want to see y'all just hovering. I want to see y'all floating in the air. I want to see us all just flying up. And last week, Vince was giving us a lesson we should have been flying on. But yet old man Satan, that evil one, boy, he had us tied down. And you know something good about that old evil one? Boy, when he ties us down, he does a good job. He does a good. It takes all you can do. Poor preacher working himself to death, trying to unloose us. And y'all remember, I'm finna sit down here. I know y'all don't want to hear, but I'm finna sit down here. Y'all remember when Jesus went and he called Lazarus. He came out, but he had on some dead clothes. Jesus said what? Loose him and let him go.
Bless us.